At exactly 10:22 in the morning on June 4th, 1942, it was over. Not the battle, not the war, but Japan's chance of winning it. 6 minutes, that's all it took. 6 minutes of chaos, of pilots diving straight into anti-aircraft fire, of pure blind luck intersecting with perfect timing, and 3 of the most powerful warships ever built were sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Before those 6 minutes, Japan controlled the entire Pacific. After them, they never won another major offensive for the rest of the war. This is the story of the 6 minutes that broke the Japanese Empire. To understand why Midway mattered, you have to understand just how dominant Japan was in the months before it. By mid-1942, Japan had conquered an area roughly the size of the continental United States. The Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, Burma, Singapore, which Britain had called impenetrable, fell in just 7 days, and at the center of all of it was the Imperial Japanese Navy. Specifically, a strike force called Kido Butai, the same fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. These weren't just ships, they were the most experienced carrier force on Earth. Their pilots had logged thousands of combat hours. Their coordination was years ahead of anything the Allies could match. After Pearl Harbor, Japan essentially told the Pacific, "We own this ocean now." And for a while, they were right. So where does Midway fit in? To answer that, you need to understand what Japan was actually trying to do, and why it was, when you look back at it, a plan that contained one catastrophic flaw. Japan's Admiral Yamamoto had a problem. Pearl Harbor had been a tactical success, but it had missed the thing that mattered most, America's aircraft carriers. They'd been out to sea that morning, and they survived. Yamamoto knew that as long as those carriers existed, America could still fight back. So he needed to destroy them. But how do you lure an enemy fleet into a battle they can't walk away from? You threaten something they can't afford to lose. Midway Atoll sits roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. It's tiny, barely 2 square miles of land, but strategically, it's one of the most important pieces of real estate in the Pacific. Lose Midway, and Japan can threaten Hawaii itself. Yamamoto's plan was elegant. Send an overwhelming force to capture Midway. America, with no choice, sends its carriers to defend it. Japan's superior fleet ambushes them and wipes them out. With no carriers left, the US has nothing to stop Japan from doing whatever it wants in the Pacific. On paper, it was close to perfect. The problem, America wasn't following the script. Here's the part of this story that almost sounds too good to be true. Months before Midway, a small team of US Navy cryptanalysts in a basement in Pearl Harbor had been cracking Japan's encrypted communications. Their lead analyst, a man named Joseph Rochefort, was obsessive, unconventional, and worked 24-hour shifts in a bathrobe. By May 1942, Rochefort's team had partially cracked Japan's naval code. They knew a major operation was coming. They knew it was targeting a location Japan called AF. But what was AF? Rochefort had a theory. He ordered Midway to send a fake radio message saying their freshwater distillation plant had broken down. Days later, Japan intercepted it and sent an encrypted update. AF is short on freshwater. AF was Midway. America now knew where Japan was going, roughly when they'd arrive, and how many ships were coming. They had the most dangerous thing possible in warfare, information their enemy didn't know they had. While Japan was setting a trap, America was building a better one. June 4th, 1942, 4:30 a.m. Japan launches the first wave of aircraft toward Midway Island. The plan is running on schedule: bomb the island into submission, then wait for the American carriers to come running. But Admiral Nagumo, commanding the Japanese carriers, had a problem. His planes had attacked Midway, but the island's defenses were still holding. His air commander was asking for a second strike. Meanwhile, his scouts were reporting something uncomfortable. American ships had been spotted nearby. Were there carriers among them? The scouts couldn't confirm. And here's where it starts to unravel. To rearm his aircraft for a second strike on Midway, Nagumo needed to swap out the armor-piercing torpedoes, the ones designed to sink ships and replace them with land bombs. It was a 90-minute process. The planes, the bombs, the torpedoes, all of it stacked on the flight decks and hangar bays. Then a new scout report came in. There were carriers out there, American carriers. Now Nagumo needed to reverse the entire rearming process, swap back to torpedoes. His flight decks were covered in half-armed aircraft, loose ordnance, and aviation fuel. Every minute they spent on deck was a minute they were dangerously exposed. The American dive bombers were already in the air. At 10:20 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's dive bombers were running on fumes. They'd been searching for the Japanese fleet for over 2 hours. They were almost out of fuel. McCluskey made a gut call, fly one more search pattern. 2 minutes later, he spotted the white wake of a Japanese destroyer below him, racing to catch up with the fleet. He followed it. At 10:22 a.m., McCluskey's squadron rolled into their dives. The Japanese fighters, the famous Zeros, were down at low altitude, hunting American torpedo bombers that had already been nearly wiped out. The skies above the carrier fleet were empty. The dive bombers came straight down. 3 carriers, Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu, were hit within minutes of each other. The loose ordnance on their flight decks turned each ship into a chain of explosions. Fuel lines ruptured. Fires spread faster than they could be controlled. By 10:28 a.m., all 3 were burning beyond saving. 6 minutes, 3 carriers destroyed. It would have taken the US Navy years to build replacements. Japan never recovered. A 4th carrier, Soryu, survived long enough to launch a counterattack, hitting the American carrier USS Yorktown hard enough to eventually sink her. But by the end of June 4th, Soryu was gone too. Japan had arrived at Midway with 4 fleet carriers. It left with none. Here's something that gets lost in the pure drama of those 6 minutes. Japan didn't just lose 4 ships at Midway, they lost roughly 3,000 men, including a significant number of their most experienced, irreplaceable carrier pilots. In modern warfare, ships can be built. Pilots, truly skilled ones, cannot be replaced in months, or even years. After Midway, Japan was forced into a defensive war. Every major offensive plan, including a proposed invasion of Australia and the isolation of Hawaii, was shelved permanently. The Americans, meanwhile, were operating factories that were producing new carriers and aircraft at a rate Japan could not come close to matching. Each month that passed, the gap widened. Midway didn't end the Pacific War. That took 3 more brutal years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But it fundamentally changed who was chasing whom. Before Midway, Japan was hunting. After Midway, Japan was running. 6 minutes. That's the lens through which military historians keep returning to Midway. Not because wars are won in 6 minutes, they rarely are, but because those 6 minutes were the intersection of code-breaking and carrier tactics, of Japan's overconfidence and America's desperation, and they happened to land at exactly the right moment. If McCluskey's fuel had run out 10 minutes earlier, he turns back. If Nagumo's scouts had reported the carriers sooner, the flight decks would have been cleared. If Japan's Zero fighters had been at altitude instead of hunting torpedo planes below the clouds, the entire sequence falls apart. History doesn't run on inevitability, it runs on moments, and that was one of them. If you want to see another battle where a single decision changed everything, the video on the right is exactly that. I'll see you there.